There was once a king and a queen who lived in a palace and had 6 daughters. The king went off into battle and was sadly killed. The queen remained at the palace and was concerned about her kingdom being overthrown. She went to speak to a mystic lady who advised her that there was a dark fate in her family. It possessed one of her daughters, and she would have to cast out the daughter to save the kingdom. The queen asked how she was to identify which daughter it was. The mystic lady explained that the dark fate existed in the daughter that slept on her back with her arms across her chest as if in a coffin. The queen didn't want to cast out any of her children, but she knew she had to for the greater good. That night she put her children to bed, read them stories and tucked them in. Once they were sound asleep, she returned to their bedroom to see how each of her daughters slept. One daughter was doing a starfish. Another was curled up in the fetal position. Another was half on the bed and half off the bed. The other was curled up in a ball. The other was on her tummy. And the youngest child was on her back, arms across her chest. The queen went over to her bedside and wept. The child awoke at the sound of the weeping and asked her mother why she was crying. The queen explained. The daughter felt that there was nothing else to do, so she got dressed, packed a few things, and she left the palace to walk off into the night. At the edge of the town was a lake, and nearby a gathering of outcasts gathered around a small fire. She managed to squeeze herself into a space around the fire and tried to keep warm. She could see a bush from where she sat, and it looked like someone was in the bush. Curious, she wandered over to investigate. As she peered into the bush, she could just make out a face. It was filthy and looked deformed. A horrible cackle laugh came out of the bush, and the voice said, "This is your fate." It frightened her, and she ran away. She came to a town where she met some weavers who had a mill. They let her stay there and work in the mill. They referred to her as Miss Fortune, due to her misfortune at being cast out of the palace. She worked in the mill and she slept in the safe that contained all the precious garments that had been made. They were worth a lot of money, so the weavers were happy for her to stay there as a guard. She had to lock the door from the inside, and they locked the door from the outside. She slept that night, happy to have somewhere warm to rest. However, her sleep was interrupted by an ugly, old, deformed woman who out of nowhere appeared in the room with her. "I am your fate," she hissed. She had grimy skin and a face twisted with hate. She cackled a horrible laugh and then started ripping up all the garments and smashing up the room. Before Miss Fortune knew what was happening, the ugly old woman vanished and she was left alone amongst the devastation. At first light, the weavers returned. They unlocked the door from the outside and asked her to unlock the door from the inside. They came in to see the devastation and they were outraged. "How could you do this to us? Get out! We don't want to see you again." Miss Fortune left, again on her own with nowhere to go. In the next town she came across a glassware shop and she asked if there was somewhere to stay. The kind shop owner invited her into his home above the shop, fed her and allowed her to sleep in his storeroom. Miss Fortune snuggled down to rest, happy that she had a full tummy and somewhere to sleep. Again her sleep was interrupted by the same ugly old deformed woman. Grimy skin and a face twisted with hate. "I am your fate," she hissed. She cacked at the same horrible laugh and began smashing all of the glass items around her. Hearing the noise, the shopkeeper rushed downstairs, and upon opening the storeroom door, the ugly old woman vanished, leaving poor Miss Fortune alone amongst the smashed glass. "How could you do this to me?" the shopkeeper exclaimed. "Get out! I don't want to see you again." Miss Fortune left once more, all alone with nowhere to go. In the next town there was a laundrette, and she thought, surely I can't do any damage here. She introduced herself to the laundrette lady, who welcomed her in and said that if she helped with the washing, she could stay the night. The two ladies worked hard laundering all the clothes, and during a rest break, the laundrette lady asked Miss Fortune her story. She told it from beginning to end for the first time ever. From her father being killed in battle to the ugly old deformed lady reporting to be her fate. She cried, "Is this to be my fate?" The laundrette lady listened intently and comforted her where she could. The two ladies then got back to work, starching and pressing the laundry. When all was done, the laundrette lady went and returned the freshly laundered clothes to their owner and was paid a bag of silver. She went to the market and bought fine flour and some spices. She went back to the laundrette, and in the back kitchen she baked 2 loaves of sweet-smelling bread. She handed them both to Miss Fortune and instructed her to take 1 loaf to the group of outcasts by the lake and to give the other loaf to her fate. Miss Fortune did as instructed. She gave 1 loaf to the group and told them to share, which they did. Then she headed over to the bush and called out to her fate. The ugly old deformed lady came slithering out from the bush, took the bread and slid back into the undergrowth. Back at the laundrette, Miss Fortune fell asleep. Her sleep was not interrupted, and she woke up excited and grateful not to be hurried out into the street. She happily helped the laundrette lady all day long. At the end of the day, the fresh laundry was returned to its owner, and this time the laundrette lady baked 2 more loaves, but also bought some jasmine-scented soap and oils, a comb, and a fresh cotton dress. She sent Miss Fortune back to the lake, this time instructing her to cleanse her fate. Miss Fortune ran back to the lake, gave the bread to the outcasts, and called out to her fate. The ugly old deformed lady slithered out from under the bush and took the bread, but before she could vanish, Miss Fortune grabbed her by the arms and started pulling her towards the lake. Her fate resisted and tried to escape, but Miss Fortune held on firm and dragged her fate into the water, where she began bathing her. She scrubbed off all the grime and she combed out the mangled hair. She put oil on the now clean skin and helped the old lady into the clean cotton dress. She no longer looked ugly, and her face was no longer deformed and twisted with hate. She even had half a smile on her face. The old lady handed Miss Fortune a small box. Excitedly, Miss Fortune ran back to the laundrette, and the 2 women opened the box together. Inside was a small piece of braid. Miss Fortune was a bit disappointed. "Well, I guess it's something," she said. "Or maybe it's nothing." Days and weeks went by, and Miss Fortune had no more interrupted nights. She enjoyed working at the laundrette. If this was her lot, she'd be content with it. The laundrette lady was happy for the help and the company in exchange for food and boarding. One afternoon, she returned some laundry to the palace and learnt that one of the Queen's daughters was due to be married, but there was a problem with the wedding dress. It was missing a braid from its hem, and the daughter was refusing marriage unless it was perfect. The laundrette lady ran home and found the small box with the braid in it. She raced back to the palace and handed the braid to the dressmaker, who was astounded at the perfect fit. The daughter and her new husband were so thrilled that they promised the laundrette lady the weight of the braid in gold. The scales were brought out and the braid was placed on the one end. A gold coin was placed on the other end, but the scales didn't move. A small bag of gold was placed on the scales, but they did not balance. A sack of gold was placed on the scales, and still it did not balance. This was no ordinary braid. It was something that was thought to be nothing, but ended up being everything. Thank you for listening.